Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. So again, continuing on with my end of the year roundup for 2023 in GT7. We're going to rank all of the tracks that came to the game in 2023. So the way I'm going to work this, so things such as long layouts, short layouts, the reverses as well, I'm going to have those included in my ranking of each individual track. So it won't just be the locations, because if that was the case, we'd only have 2 new of them. So this is how it's going to be broken down. 7 tracks that came in. Like I said, I will be taking into account the reverse layouts as well for some of these tracks if it does have one. So from Lake Louise we have the tri-oval, we have the short layout and the long layout. From the Nürburgring we got 2 new layouts in the form of the sprint and the endurance, which came along in March. And then from the first update of the year in February, and the VR update, is Grand Valley Highway 1, which includes both the long and the south layout, both having reverse track layouts as well, but I will be taking them into account for this ranking. Also things like day-night cycles could possibly help obviously boost the track up the ranking. So in at number 7, and my personal worst track of the year for 2023 that came along, is going to be Lake Louise short course. Now I have to admit that for me it just feels totally uninspired. For me, Lake Louise is a fantastic track itself. It's a very good original track. It's brimming with personality on both the sort of tri-over layout, which just feels like a track that I never knew I needed until I'd driven on it, and the long layout just feels like it is just crammed with absolute detail, from, you know, the houses in the background and the, you know, the way that the day-night cycle works there. It just feels absolutely fantastic. But for me, the short course just feels like it's taken the first section of the long course and then that's it. You know, it just feels totally uninspired compared to the rest of them. For me, the tri-oval is just a much better racetrack. It's again just a pretty weird and wacky idea having a tri-oval snow track, and obviously the long course, like I said, is brimming with personality. But for me, the short course just feels very, very uninspired, just in the way it's laid out, just in the racing that goes on here. For me, it is not only the weakest of the 3 Lake Louise layouts, it's just the overall weakest track that we got this year. So for me, coming in at number 7 has to be the Lake Louise short course. I'm just not really a fan of this track. It just again feels totally uninspired. So let's move on to number 6. Now this doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad track, because apart from the short course of Lake Louise, I don't dislike any of these tracks, but for me it has to be the full layout of Grand Valley Highway 1. So maybe for me I'm a little bit biased, considering I've been playing the Gran Turismo games ever since the original release, and for me Grand Valley is just one of the most iconic tracks in the entire franchise of GT. But to be honest, for me, kind of taking something that isn't broke and then trying to fix it and making it something completely different just didn't really work. For me, Grand Valley really worked so well because you almost had this, you know, big stadium starting point. You had all the grandstands and stuff. Then you kind of went into the sort of more, I guess, mountainous region, you know, through the caverns and stuff, out onto the bridge, through the tunnel, and then back once again into the stadium. It was a fantastic original track, and for me, to kind of make Grand Valley even better, they could have just kind of, you know, redone it and ported it back over to GT7, and that would have been absolutely fine. It doesn't necessarily mean it's one of the greatest tracks for racing, by no means. Obviously that kind of shows with Grand Valley Highway 1. It's just not a great racetrack, but for me it just kind of spoiled what was fantastic about Grand Valley in the first place. Again, I'm not taking away from the fact that Highway 1 is a visually stunning track, and I think at the time that this track kind of released, it was the perfect timing for it. Obviously coming alongside the PSVR 2 update, I spent a ton of time just cruising around this track in VR and kind of taking in all the sights and stuff. You know, you've got pretty cool things like the, you know, hidden UFO Easter egg, which kind of make this track feel almost special. But if I'm ranking it as a track for, you know, I guess racing and the races that I've had here over the almost last year or so, Grand Valley Highway 1 really doesn't hold up. And again, I'm just not a fan that they kind of absolutely changed over this track. I think again, if it was something on its own and didn't have the Grand Valley name tied into it, it would have been a completely different opinion. But for me, I'm still waiting on that original Grand Valley to return. So that comes in at number 6. So let's move on to number 5. Again, like I said, none of these tracks from 6 onwards do I necessarily dislike. So again, I don't dislike this track. This is going to go to the Nürburgring sprint layout. Now for me, I've never been a huge fan of the Nürburgring GP layout. I've always been sort of a fanboy of the Nordschleife, you know, the more kind of technical version at the Nürburgring. But for me, the Nürburgring sprint, it kind of takes away the monotony and the boringness of the GP layout. For me, that second part of the GP layout has always just been rather quite uninspired and pretty boring to me personally. For me, kind of taking away from that actually improves the GP layout. So for me, the sprint layout is the better version of the actual, I guess, track itself, not including the Nordschleife. So yeah, absolutely a great layout. It does provide some good racing. I feel like it's not too long and not too short, that you can still run plenty of different classes here. I've run everything from Group 3, Group 4, obviously road cars as well do work really well here. So it is a very versatile layout of a track without obviously the boring second sector. You know, kind of cutting that out really does help. So again, it's not too short, it's not too long, it's pretty much perfect for anything up to a Group 3. A Group 2, maybe a Group 1 would be a little bit too quick round here and will provide, you know, far too short of a lap, but for anything under that, absolutely spot on. So for me, the Nürburgring sprint layout is a fairly good track. I don't hate it. It's still a little bit dull in my honest opinion, but definitely not a bad track layout at all. So let's move into number 4. So for me, this is a good track, not quite good enough to make the top 3 for the year. This is going to be Grand Valley Highway. It's a 1 South. So yeah, you might have kind of thought that I just genuinely didn't like Grand Valley, but I genuinely do. Whilst again, I'm a bit biased to the original and all that stuff, for me, Grand Valley Highway South is just a much better layout. It's much better for racing. It's a little bit shorter. I do feel like, you know, the Grand Valley lap itself does kind of drag on. It's not necessarily good for those faster cars either, because it's far too, you know, tight for the big race cars, whereas the sort of south layout is much shorter. It works for road cars, works again for, you know, more up to Group 4-ish kind of cars, and I think it's absolutely perfect kind of the way it is. You know, it kind of cuts out some of the more boring points of the track and definitely kind of allows better racing overall. The kind of cut through towards the beginning of the lap where it sort of weaves downhill is fantastic for overtaking opportunities. It's really kind of, you know, almost roller coaster like in the way that it kind of presents itself and the way that you can kind of push the cars down that section, and then it kind of cuts out the bridge, goes back through the tunnel, and then onto that big long straight. Again, kind of works for anything from around about Group 4 downwards into the road cars and such, where I think you're going to have an absolute blast here. I know for me, I've had much better memories and much better racing at the south layout. So let's move into our bronze award, number 3. For me, this is a fantastic track. This is going to go to Lake Louise Tri-Oval. So don't get me wrong, it kind of falls into the same category as the short course, where it's not necessarily brimming with all that personality that long course has. However, in terms of a track that I didn't know I wanted until I'd actually driven on it, Lake Louise Tri-Oval is absolutely fantastic. I've had some great laughs here, you know, hosting custom lobbies, just doing some ridiculous snow racing. For me, the snow racing itself is a million times better than the sort of dirt racing that we see, and the Tri-Oval layout for some really fast, ridiculous snow racing is fantastic. For me, some of the cars that I've driven here, some of the cars that I see on the track here, just kind of, you know, bring me back to those old times of Gran Turismo, just getting that little bit ridiculous. Like you can just see in the background there, we've got the likes of a TVR Tuscan that is kind of flying through on the snow. It's just absolutely bizarre, and again, it takes me back to those times when Gran Turismo just lets itself go a little bit, stops being so serious, and just brings something absolutely bonkers to the game. The Tri-Oval is fantastic and it's fast. Let's move on to our silver award though, number 2. This is going to be the Nürburgring Nordschleife endurance layout. So essentially what this is a combination of the sprint layout, which like I said, for me is the better version on the more kind of GP-esque section of the track, combined with the Nordschleife itself. Obviously a few chicane changes as well to get yourself up on to the Nordschleife. So for me, if this is the ideal version of the Nürburgring for me, if we're going for the full layout, it's better than the 24-hour layout, just mainly because it kind of cuts off that, you know, middle sector, and then you're straight onto the Nordschleife for obviously, you know, the iconic green hell and all that kind of stuff. So I really do like this layout. Again, it's made even better by the fact that it does have day-night cycle. It's rain eligible as well, which is just absolutely great. I've had some great races here ever since this came along to the game in March, and for me this is the absolute pinnacle and best layout of the Nürburgring that there is in GT7. I think the reason this kind of tops the list and gets towards the top of the list so easily is just the fact that it's obviously got the Nordschleife, which is where I do all my car reviews, so I absolutely just love the Nordschleife itself. It's iconic, it's fantastic for racing, although it's very tight and technical. You can have some great battles here. As you can see, I've got this Dodge Viper here going side by side with the Corvette and, you know, battling it out. It's very much all about planning your overtakes. You can't just kind of shove it down the inside without both of you ending up in the barrier. Obviously the day-night cycle, really good for the atmosphere. The rain here as well can provide an absolute nightmare or a driving heaven depending on which way you want to take it. So for me, the endurance layout is just absolutely fantastic. It's the pinnacle of the Nürburgring. For me, it's just absolutely top tier. I wasn't going into this track layout expecting much because obviously it's very similar to obviously the 24-hour layout, but for me, just getting rid of that second sector just absolutely put this to the top of my Nürburgring layout. So for me, that's going to come in at Silver Award and number 2 on that spot. So let's move in to number 1. So taking our gold award and obviously number 1 spot on my top tracks that came to GT7 in 2023 is the only track that's remaining. That is Lake Louise Long Course. Now the reason I absolutely love this track, it's an original track. It's one of the what feels like better original tracks in a long time for GT7. It introduced snow racing, snow tires, all that kind of cool stuff, and for me it's absolutely brimming with personality. For me it really does feel like almost something like Grindelwald from GT2. For me, this track itself just kind of harkens back to those old school days of Gran Turismo, and just in terms of the way it's presented, the styling, the track side, the day-night cycle, you know, when it's all lit up at night, and actually the layout itself is really enjoyable. I wasn't thinking too much into this. When I saw it kind of, you know, I guess get revealed kind of as a bit of a shock to almost anyone or alongside Spec 2, I thought, okay, you know, it might be good for a little bit, or it might just be one of those tracks that kind of just fades away rather quite quickly. But I find myself coming back to this track a lot more than I genuinely expected to, and I think not only is the layout itself great for the snow racing, the fact that snow racing came to the game, the fact that it's brimming with atmosphere, it's got the day-night cycle, it's got the trackside, you know, looks and everything like that. I just think it's just overall a great racetrack. For me, this is perhaps the ultimate rallycross track in Gran Turismo 7, and I really don't have a bad word to say about it. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. For me, it was an unexpected surprise. And honestly, for me, it really showed that Polyphony can do original tracks still. We've had a few weak ones during GT Sport, but for me, this is peak Gran Turismo original track. So there we go. That is my rankings of all tracks that came to GT7 in 2023. Don't forget to let me know what you think down below. To be honest, again, it's all about your own opinion. We're all going to be different. We're all going to think different tracks are better than the others. So, you know what, if you do disagree, instead of just kind of shouting off, just let me know what you think down below. Give me your order of the 7 layouts and track locations that came to GT7 in 2023. Thank you so much for your support this year, and I will probably see you in 2024. Take care, guys. Peace.